The Coast Guard seized a fishing boat in San Francisco Bay today after allegedly finding 1 joint's worth of marijuana aboard. It's the first seizure in Northern California under the government's new zero-tolerance policy toward drugs. And as News Center 4's Mike Kelly reports, that controversial policy could cost the owner his boat.
The Nicole Marie, a San Francisco fishing boat berthed at Moss Landing, was seized late this afternoon, about 10 miles south of the Bay Bridge. The Coast Guard boarded the 50-foot vessel. A spokesman says they found about a thimbleful of marijuana, just enough trace elements to be identified by a test.
That's a pretty small amount, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but it's enough for us to detain the vessel and turn it over to Customs.
He says he found a piece about that big.
The boat's owner, a 45-year-old man who identified himself only as Steve, says the Nicole Marie is worth a few $100,000. The fishing boat was detained as part of a new Get Tough anti-drug campaign, a federal law known as zero tolerance. It allows for vessels carrying illegal drugs to be seized and forfeited.
We've been directed by the Congress to seize any vessels with any amount of illegal substances on board, no matter how small.
No criminal charges have been filed against the owner of the boat or his wife. The pair live with their dog on board the Nicole Marie. They say they fish for albacore and swordfish up and down the Pacific coast. They say they were in the bay today for repairs when the Coast Guard boarded.
They were out on a regular safety boarding, and they found the marijuana in plain view on the deck of the pilot house.
What will happen to the Nicole Marie? That's up to U.S. Customs.
They said they seized it. U.S. Customs owns it now.
After a search of the boat is completed, U.S. Customs could auction it off or return it to its owner. On Coast Guard Island, Mike Kelly, News Center 4.
One with what the Coast Guard calls 1 joint's worth of marijuana on board. This Get Tough policy has set off a whirlwind of controversy, and we have 2 reports tonight on that story, beginning with Mike Kelly.
A drug-sniffing dog spent 45 minutes on board the Nicole Marie today, but officials say it turned up nothing new. The 50-foot commercial fishing boat was seized yesterday after a Coast Guard boarding team making a routine safety inspection found a thimbleful of marijuana. The boat is now the property of U.S. Customs, and boat owner Stephen Rittenberg could lose his $250,000 investment because of a few pennies of pot. The skipper's only recourse is to post bond and hope for a favorable ruling from the U.S. attorney. His boat is the first in Northern California to be seized under the new federal anti-drug offensive known as zero tolerance. U.S. Customs District Director Paul Andrews.
The point of the program was to send a message to the American people that no drugs is the quantity that is acceptable, zero tolerance.
I think it's mostly a case of zero intelligence as opposed to zero tolerance.
Richard Spindler, publisher of the sailing magazine Latitude 38, says many members of the Bay Area boating community think zero tolerance is a misguided policy.
I'd say the vast majority are against smuggling because it ruins the places they may want to go. But, they think this is the wrong way to do it.
Does the punishment fit the crime?
It's the National Policy Board on Drugs decided that this was a policy, so that is what we're carrying out.
The confiscated boat will be towed this evening to a secure North Bay location until a final decision on its fate is reached. On Coast Guard Island, Mike Kelly, News Center 4.
This is Bob Sirkin in Alameda, where many fishermen and pleasure boaters who long considered the Coast Guard a helping friend now view it as a menace and an enemy. But despite a serious public relations problem, the Coast Guard says it's full steam ahead for zero-tolerance enforcement. The administration's effort to put the onus on the drug users, no matter how minuscule the amount. Coast Guard Captain Bob Schoengert, Operations Chief for the Pacific.
You're talking about a marijuana joint that may be worth at best $1 against the worth of the boat, which is $250,000 in the case of the Nicole Marie. Does that make sense?
Sure it does. When you look at the basic problem that we're trying to deal with, the aggregate of demand is what brings in the supply. It's unlawful to bring it in. It's unlawful to use it.
But more unlawful in the eyes of federal officials than those from the state. In California, possession of an ounce or less of marijuana is considered only a misdemeanor. And when it comes to arrest powers, no federal agency has more of them than the Coast Guard. The fact is, the Coast Guard carries with it the right to board any U.S. flagship, anywhere, anytime. They usually do it to perform safety checks. But as demonstrated in the case of the Nicole Marie, the Coast Guard didn't have a specific reason for boarding. They just felt like it. How all this plays against the Fourth Amendment, protecting us against unlawful search and seizure, isn't all that clear, says Stanford law professor and constitutional expert John Kaplan.
There are provisions for forfeiting a ship that's carried drugs. But the problem is they weren't intended to apply where somebody, and especially not even the owner, has left a marijuana cigarette on them. There are an awful lot of things that the law permits that are still pretty stupid.
Lawful or not, zero tolerance has made a lot of boat owners think twice about what and who they take aboard. Alameda fisherman Rick Maddox.
You smoke a joint once in a while?
Occasionally, yes.
Will you bring it on the boat now?
No. No, I will not.
Won't take the chance?
Won't. No, it's my father's boat.
The zero tolerance scorecard nationwide, 25 boats seized, 4 of them on the West Coast. Bob Serkin, News Center for Alameda.
Million-dollar yachts, among other things, seized just for traces of drugs on board. And it has provoked outrage. Today, as NBC's Robert Hager reports now, the Coast Guard gave in to critics on one major part of this policy.
It's a tough policy, pushed by some of the administration's most outspoken officials. Attorney General Edwin Meese, Customs Commissioner William Von Raab, who once proposed shooting down planes suspected of drug running, and Transportation Secretary James Burnley, who made it clear the policy was aimed not just at smugglers, but at recreational users as well.
Now, if you've got a couple of ounces of marijuana and you end up losing a $300,000 yacht because of that, that is likely to be a substantial deterrent.
The example wasn't far off. The $2.5 million yacht Ark Royal seized after 1/10 of an ounce of marijuana was found. The monkey business, once chartered for Gary Hart and Donna Rice, seized after finding 1/28 of an ounce of marijuana. The famed research vessel Atlantis II seized after 1/4 of a gram of marijuana was found. Critics said the penalties were out of all proportion to the offense. In each case, the vessels had to be quickly released. Today, after a barrage of complaints from lawmakers and others, the government backed down. The Coast Guard said that more than 12 miles from shore, it will no longer seize vessels for possession of small amounts of drugs. Coast Guard officials said within 12 miles of shore, laws against possession of drugs apply. They'll go on making seizures. But beyond 12 miles, they admitted there's no law against possession, only against intent to smuggle drugs into the U.S. Everyone had an excuse for the botch-up. Coast Guard spokesman Jim Simpson.
The distinction is in that we have to establish intent to import. And why that wasn't made at the outset, I don't know.
Did Customs Von Raab know?
Some of the Coast Guard boats were not as aware as they should have been of the standards that Customs was applying in deciding whether to take the boats that the Coast Guard brought to them from the high seas.
Did Attorney General Meese know?
When you have any new policy, it takes a while to implement it properly, and you learn from experience.
One other government official had a different explanation. He said the operation had been overzealous from the start. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
No tolerance today in San Francisco Bay. Federal authorities made a huge drug bust on a barge being towed into that bay. Hashish and marijuana worth $162 million. Officials confiscated 30 tons of hashish, described as a record seizure of that drug, along with 15 tons of marijuana. The drugs were found in compartments that had been welded shut. The Coast Guard said the drugs were transferred to the barge from another ship 1,000 miles offshore. 5 crew members from a tugboat towing the barge were arrested today.
The program is doing, seizing boats, even if small amounts of drugs are found on board. Victoria Corderi has more.
The chorus of angry pleasure boaters who feel victimized by the controversial zero-tolerance anti-drug policy is getting louder.
They frisked me, handcuffed me, Mirandized me, and insisted I wasn't being arrested.
Miami businessman Sebastian Groves wasn't arrested, but his fishing boat was seized. He says officers told him they scraped 7 grains of pot from the boat's deck. He is the first boater going to court to fight zero tolerance.
I want my boat back. It was taken wrongfully away from me, and I want it back.
In recent weeks, there have been several high-profile and embarrassing seizures of yachts and pleasure boats that had minuscule amounts of drugs or drug paraphernalia on board.
Criticism over such incidents has led to a policy shift on zero tolerance. The Coast Guard now says it will no longer seize vessels in international waters unless there is evidence they are being used for smuggling.
When you have any new policy, it takes a while to implement it properly, and you learn from experience. And so in this case, there have been some operational refinements, but the policy remains the same.
Zero tolerance has had some victories. The Coast Guard boarded this tug outside of San Francisco Bay and found 40 tons of marijuana and hashish aboard. Critics have no problem with those kinds of seizures.
If drug smuggling is the problem, then look for drug smugglers. Don't look for businessmen and average citizens.
Some businessmen still aren't taking any chances. This boat owner hired dogs to sniff out any stray drugs on board. And in San Diego, one cruise line suspended operations because owners said they couldn't afford to lose their boats. But with the latest modifications of the seizure policy, critics hope that even more changes will happen, that the administration's tolerance for bad publicity will be even lower than its tolerance for drugs. Victoria Corderi, CBS.